Hey, Ron here from Military Images Magazine. Thanks for joining me for a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Gotta say, I read with excitement the National Portrait Gallery's press release about the installation of an oil portrait of Abraham Lincoln, one of only three life-size paintings of our 16th president. The last time this painting, I've got a nice picture of it for you here, the last time it received any serious attention was 147 years ago at the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. In that exhibit, it was placed alongside another life-size portrait of President George Washington. So it received a lot of attention and then pretty much disappeared after that. You know, it's easy to get caught up in the beauty and the symbolism of this Lincoln portrait, and rightly so. If you look at the portrait, you can see a globe positioned on Haiti, which President Lincoln recognized as an independent nation in 1862, and also a document representing the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. As you know, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. But I got to thinking, what about the artist who painted Lincoln? What's his backstory? Well, it's actually really interesting to find out who was the person who painted this and why they made this life-size portrait of Lincoln. So his name is Willem Frederick Carel Travers. He's from the Netherlands, comes from a German family. And in doing some research, I found a 1913 newspaper article that provides some pretty interesting details about how he came to do the painting. So according to the report, Travers was the son of a German portrait artist. Young Travers was educated in military school in Germany. And in 1864, he made that decision that so many immigrants make, which is to leave their home country and come to the United States. So Travers, he's actually in his 30s at the time. He comes over to the United States for the sole purpose of joining the fight for the Union. He wants to join the Army. Remember, he has a military education, so he has some background there that will help him. He enlists in New York, but he fails the physical exam because of heart trouble. He's down, but he's not out. He's determined to contribute to the Union cause in some way. And so he comes up with a new plan. He falls back on his career as a portrait artist, and he decides to paint a portrait of Lincoln from life. So he goes to Washington, leaves New York, and goes to Washington on this self-appointed patriotic task. There's a quote about him. Imagine this guy, he's in America, he's new in America, he finds his way to Washington, doesn't have that many people he knows, and here he is trying to get a meeting set up with Lincoln, with the president. The quote from this report says, "Those to whom he spoke of his project regarded him as a mild sort of crank and advised him to give up on the idea. What few friends he had who might have introduced him to the president excused themselves from doing so on one ground or another." So basically, he's all alone. He's in Washington. No one's going to help this guy out. One day, he's on the streets of the city, and there he sees Lincoln. I know, back in the day, the 1860s, and in the 19th century, presidents could roam around freely. So here's Lincoln out in the street, and Travers basically walks up to Lincoln, introduces himself, and begins to tell his story. Meanwhile, Lincoln, maybe not exactly knowing what to make of this, but the polite man that he is hearing all of the story and reacting to it. You can imagine the buzz of the city around him, probably some small crowds gathering. We don't have any detail there, but we do know that there's this moment in time when Lincoln and Travers are speaking. During that conversation, Travers says to Lincoln, "In some way, I want to be identified with these stirring times." He's told Lincoln he's not going to be a soldier. He tells Lincoln he's a painter. And somehow this grabs Lincoln. Lincoln eventually acquiesces and agrees to have his portrait made. Travers works with the White House to set up an appointment for a sitting with the president. The first sitting lasts about an hour. And then later on, there's several briefer sittings so that Travers can finish his sketches and get the likeness the way he wants to. And then he goes back and begins working on his painting to try and finish it. Of course, we're talking about 1865 by this point. Lincoln never glimpses the finished portrait. He dies at the hands of John Wilkes Booth, an assassin's bullet, never sees the painting. Travers, meanwhile, barely outlives Lincoln. Remember, he had heart troubles and other issues. He dies in 1869, so he only lives 4 years longer than Lincoln. And Travers was in his early 40s at the time. But Travers did finish the painting, and it lives on. When you see the painting, think of Lincoln. It's only right that you do, and his contributions to freeing enslaved people, the 13th Amendment, codifying all of that. Think of all of that. But also think of Travers, an artist who came to the United States to fight for freedom, couldn't make that work, but found a way to use his innate God-given talents to paint this wonderful portrait that you'll soon see at the National Portrait Gallery. He left behind a masterpiece. Until we meet again, happy trails.